event, and also in California with the Briggs Initiative the following year, which attempted unsuccessfully to deny lesbian and gay teachers the right to work. So I think there was a kind of a certain political cynicism afoot, which saw this as a very successful discourse. Do you have any other thoughts on this, Erin?
Well, one of the things that I know was discussed at the time was because of the rise of a feminist discourse at all, generally, that there was an acknowledgement that women's lives unfolded very, very differently, and tended, there was a critique of women's lives being subsumed under sort of the male version or the human version of things. And I think there were some interesting discussions of how intergenerational sex was a very different experience for young girls than it would have been for young boys. The relationship between an older man and a young boy had perhaps more the promise of an introduction to the male world of culture and power that no male could offer a young girl, and just in terms of the way we thought about sexual roles and so forth. And I wondered, I mean, I don't think this discourse should have disappeared in quite this way, and it took its toll on the gay and lesbian world in a very harsh way. And as you say, I think it still does today. But I do see another aspect to it, which was the acknowledgement that of the power relationships between adults and kids being mirrored in some way between men and women and so forth. So I just was very...
No, I think that's very insightful. And if you look at a film like Pretty Baby from, I think, 79 or 80, in comparison to this, which is about Brooke Shields as a 12-year-old prostitute or 15-year-old prostitute, I'm not sure. 12. It was treated, it was received very, very differently from films that were about same-sex, male intergenerational sex. The New Right, when it raised the specter of abuse, focused disproportionately, almost entirely on same-sex male intergenerational sexuality, as if the problem of abuse was entirely a homosexual issue, which of course it was not and is not. So of course gender and power are very crucial dynamics in this whole landscape. And this film, with its sort of nasty moments of misogyny on the part of some of the characters, I think is touching on that nerve in a certain way. I mean, it's interesting that on the director's commentary track on the new DVD, they're sort of cringing about that scene where Bozo harasses the teeny bopper hitchhikers, and almost considered removing it from the new version. Fortunately, they kept it in. Any other questions? Yes?
How would you explain that a film like Archival, released in 1971, had become such a classic, and the gap between both characters is far wider, and it's also very explicit. There's bad scenes, there's a lot more things that happen, and it becomes a classic. And a film like this, which everything is kind of open, just goes into the depths of the film archives.
I think it's about Canadian cinema. And Louis Malle was a very respected European auteur with the muscle of Hollywood and the muscle of international distributors behind him, and Brooke Shields as the star. And I think that's a very important.
So it's more about the market, rather.
It's about the market, it's also about this gender power distinction. I think it's very hard to generalize because Death in Venice was such a huge hit, but then Death in Venice was also susceptible to a very abstract reading, although I don't buy that reading, but I think it's also the fact that Pretty Baby was a heterosexual story that made it such an important film in the market.
Were you talking about Harold and Maude?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear your part. You talked about Harold and Maude?
Yeah.
But your response is interesting
Okay.
when because a lot of our classic, but I think the biggest difference with Harold and Maude is close to what Erica was saying. I don't think it was taken terribly serious because you have an old lady and a young man.
Right.
And that outline I've never seen
Right.
in the show.
Has everyone seen Harold Maude?
Yeah.
Ruth Gordon as an 80-year-old, and I forget his name. He wasn't really a youth, though. He was 20, or wasn't the character
Yeah.
20 or 21.
20 or 21? But it's still an intergenerational romance that has...
6 and she would be 40.
Yeah, that's exactly contemporaneous to Montreal, Maine, isn't it? And it was a huge hit, a sleeper hit. So it's a very, very interesting comparison. And also, if you look at Fassbinder's film about the relationship in the same year, I think, relationship between a young man in his 20s and a 65-year-old cleaning woman. Does everyone know that film? Angst Essen Stehler auf. It's called Ali in English, I think.
But that also goes like interracial.
Interracial.
Which was far more important than the intergenerational.
Right, right,
I mean, more in the German context.
right.
Racist.
So there's lots of very interesting contextual stuff going on. Yes,
I'm from Montreal, and I'm French Canadian, Quebecois, and in 74, I was 24 years old. I was going to see a lot of films from Quebec, French producers. And this film, I never saw it. I never heard about it. How was, what the press did at that time, the Gazette or whatever, the English newspapers, or...
it had a brief commercial run, theatrical run in Montreal, and it was reviewed in Cinéma Québec and Le Devoir. And Michel Auvra, the critic of Cinéma Québec, said it was full of virtualité inexplorée, a lot of potential. But it didn't catch on. I don't believe it was released in a French subtitle version. You can really feel the two solitudes in this film. For much of the film, you have no sense that you're in a French-speaking society, do you? Until you come to the auction in La Chute, you get a little bit of a sense of the Francophone Quebecois cultural environment, but not very much. Did you see L'été une fois, Don?
Yes, I met Michel at that time.
Congratulations, it's one of my favorites too. Yes?
Thanks. There was a character in the film who spoke compulsively. I forget what his character's name was, or the actor.
The motormouth guy?
Yeah, the motormouth guy.
Stephen Lack, yeah?
Stephen Lack, okay. It's interesting. The film's kind of impacted, it seems, around intergenerational sex. Like, does it actually have a lot to say?
Yeah, it's interesting that there is this conversation going on, and that the two most explicitly gay characters in the film are involved in this conversation about Johnny's agency and Johnny's autonomy. I don't think it is resolved, but the conversation is registered. And they seem to be, Frank and both of them don't really talk that much about that issue. I mean, this film is very 70s in the sense that everyone's talking about relationships, but Frank and Bozo aren't very good at it, are they?